So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Jenny, and then afterwards she will kindly respond to any questions we have. So thank you, Jenny.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. And I hope you guys get to go outside for some part of the day. It is beautiful out there. I can't say that all the time. For us in Vancouver, we get snow. And when we get snow, we don't know what to do. And then we're housebound. But there's no snow on the ground and the sun is out. So I hope you get a chance to get out there. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to see all of you. And thank you for coming together and inviting me to come and to speak. I am the NDP critic for immigration, refugee, citizenship, and multiculturalism. So within that bailiwick, there's a whole host of things that I think are important to Canadians. Related to the labor file, I think the closest aspect of that is the issue around temporary foreign workers. And there's one sliver within that that falls within my critic area, and that is the caregivers stream. And I don't know if you've heard about the stories and some of the experiences of the caregivers here in Canada. It really is quite atrocious in its history. I've had the privilege and honor really to meet with a lot of caregivers who's undergone this situation where the family has been broken up and their marriage has fallen apart. They have not seen their children for years on end, and they still have not reunited with their loved ones. All in the meanwhile, they're here in Canada caring for our family, caring for our kids, our seniors, and people who are in need. And these are heartbreaking stories that have been told over and over and over again. And successive governments have not taken any action to rectify the situation. Just by way of background, on the temporary foreign workers file is the government brought in the temporary foreign worker stream from so many years ago. The idea was to bring in workers to Canada to fill in positions on a temporary basis. Positions, for example, a teaching professor who would come in and do a semester of specialized teaching in a particular institution, as an example, or somebody who would come in and do a special surgery and such. Other examples would be people who come in to do filming. They're here, they do the film, and when they're done their film, they actually leave. They're not here to stay, and they have no intention of staying here in Canada. That really was the temporary foreign stream and its purpose. But over the years, with successive governments, we've been bringing more and more workers into Canada with the view of replacing Canadian workers. And then also with the view of providing, in my opinion, cheap labor. Right? And we've seen exploitation then of those temporary foreign workers in the most egregious way. People who come in here and they do not have any of their rights afforded to them. They are at the mercy of their employer, and they face horrendous abuse in that process. And they're basically in a powerless position. If they complain about it, what will happen? They get deported. They lose their job. And then they're in a situation that they can't really rectify. And they're in that disadvantage scenario. But yet, the government has been engaged in bringing in more and more temporary foreign workers over time. And what we would like to see, what I would like to see, is for us to really examine what is going on in the temporary foreign worker stream. I think that it is important that we go to that place where if you do need workers on a temporary basis, as it was formally established, that we follow that perspective, right? Not sort of go into this scenario where we're in today. And if you have a situation where workers are needed, and there are some workers that are needed in particular sectors, governments need to, in my view, first off, ensure that the training is in place to train up Canadians to fill those positions, right? That's one thing that successive governments have not done. And then the other thing is, in the case where you do require temporary foreign workers to come in, then we need to ensure that their rights are respected, that their rights are afforded to them, that they're not in this powerless situation where they can be and are being abused as they are. So in the case of caregivers, I began to say that I've met with hundreds of caregivers who come to Canada, and there is a shortage of workers who will come in and care for children and their loved ones and their families. So people needed caregivers to come to Canada to fill this position. So these temporary foreign workers, once they come, they have to work for 2 years here in Canada before they can even apply for permanent resident status. And by the way, many of the workers who come, they do want to come and stay in Canada. They do want to come and make Canada their home. They do want to bring their family members here. They do not want to leave their children and their partners behind. And for them, when they come to Canada, our rule is such that they have to work for 2 years before they can even apply for permanent resident status. And then the processing delays in these applications is so horrendous that I've met workers who's been here for 10 years and the applications still have not been processed. The average wait is 5 to 7 years. That is the average wait. So imagine what life is like for you, right? And many of them are women, by the way, are racialized women. They have left their children behind. Their children have grown up without their mother by their side. I've had caregivers come and speak with me, and they're just devastated because they're not there for their birthdays. They're not there for their children's graduations. They're not there when their children are sick. They're not there for any of the significant moments in their lives. And they don't know when they'll be reunited with their loved ones. And they're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And for many of these families, their marriage is broken up because you're not there. You're not there. And many of them could not afford to go back home to visit their family because all the money that they make, and they don't make a lot of money, but the money that they do make, they actually save up and they send home to support the family, to get their children into schools and so on, so that they can have that better future. And this is their scenario over all these years. So I've had the pleasure of meeting a variety of these caregivers across the country. And we've been pushing the government to say that this is not acceptable. This cannot be the way forward. This cannot be what I think Canadians would accept if they knew this is how caregivers are being treated. And we've been pushing the government to do this, and then as it happens, yesterday, the Minister of Immigration just made an announcement. And they've announced a new caregivers program, 2 5-year pilot projects that they will now allow for these caregivers to have open work permits when they arrive, which will help a little bit in terms of the abuse question. And that they would also allow for their family members to come with them when they come to Canada to do those 2 years of work. So that is to say that their partners would be able to get a work permit and that their children would be able to get a student visa permit so that they could be educated here and so that they wouldn't have to be separated. Now, those are good things in terms of changes, but in my view, it's not 100% there, and there's still work to be done. And there's still a lot of details that are missing with this announcement. We don't know, for example, that in this process, after people fulfill their 2 years work requirement and then they make their application for permanent resident status, what other hoops would they have to go through? And then would they be allowed to stay in Canada or would they be deported? How many medicals would they have to go through in that process? There are many unanswered questions related to that. The migrant community have been calling for the government to acknowledge the contributions of these workers and to say that really what Canada should do is to allow for these workers, if we deem their value here and want to respect their value, what we should be doing is to allow for them to have permanent residence on arrival so that they come not as temporary foreign workers, but as an immigrant, a person who comes to Canada with the intention to stay and bring their family here so that they can establish themselves here in Canada and have the full rights as we all do. I came, by the way, first as an immigrant back in 1976. I came as a family with my parents, and we came under the family reunification stream. And so we made our nest here in Canada. We learned the language. We built our future here in Canada. And we knew that. And so we were all very vested in making Vancouver our home and making Canada our home. And that's how I feel that the caregivers should be treated, right? All these workers, that they should actually be treated as permanent residents, but rather than as a foreign worker in that context. So that was just yesterday with the temporary foreign workers stream related to the caregivers. But broader than that, on the broader question with the other temporary foreign workers too, one of the other things that we find is unjust is that these workers come in and they pay, by the way, into EI, employment insurance, for example. They pay into all these other things as a requirement because it's automatically deducted from their paychecks. But they're never, ever eligible for it. They do not get to claim EI, as an example. I mean, imagine what that's like for you. You pay into all these services and into these programs, but you're never, ever going to be eligible to ever, if you're ever in need, to access it. And that's what it is like for them. And those are the rules that exist today. And we in the NDP has called for the government to say that's not fair and it's not right. If you're going to make them pay, they should be able to access those services. Otherwise, don't make them pay. I mean, you know, there's just a fundamental basic justice question here that is not, I think, answered with our policies, and these policies are not aligned, which I think are fundamentally wrong. I think that the other issue, too, is that we have history here in British Columbia, for sure, in the work arena, where a lot of the workers are being mistreated by the employer, and they don't really have an avenue to get the supports they need. And farm workers would be another example here in British Columbia where this has occurred historically. And my colleague, Rash Chauhan, who's now an MLA here in Burnaby, Rash actually came from that universe, and he actually helped organize the farm workers and created rights and ensure that people knew about rights in the various farms amongst the farm workers. And part of that work is done by organized labor. I'm very proud of the work by organized labor. For example, UFCW has done tremendous work in supporting these various workers without rights, in reaching out to them and helping to organize them so that they know about their rights, and in some cases even successfully brought them into various different unions at different places. And so the role in which organized labor have is very significant, I think, within the work sphere. You know, we celebrate May Day, for example, and I know that in this generation, a lot of people say to me, oh, what is that about? And I say, you know what? Every right that you have in the labor force was fought for us, for the people who came before us, who fought for those rights that we enjoy. That's what May Day is all about. And that's what organized unions have done historically for all of us, and what they continue to do today. The labor sector that I find particularly significant in terms of their contributions is this. Aside from advocating for rights of labor in the various unions, in the districts and so on, they also take the rights of workers beyond that. And I've seen it over and over again in non-organized labor sectors, where they've gone out to advocate for the rights of all workers. And we have seen that trend here in British Columbia, in different fields, in different sectors, to ensure that people know about their rights, to ensure that the employer respect their rights, and most important of all, what people are striving for, to be treated in a way that we all want to be treated, from our employer to be treated in that way. And organized labor has done this tremendous job over the years, both in and outside of the labor movement, in my view. And that is to all of our benefits. So the government, we have an election coming up in October. And the big question, I think, for all of us with this election coming is really to determine whether or not this current government, the Trudeau government, is doing what you thought they said they would do. Are they meeting their promises to you? People may remember Bill C-27 before the House. This is the pension bill that was brought forward, and then the lobbying that took place with the finance minister, Bill Morneau, and the changes that were made there, right, in terms of the impact for pensioners. Like, can you imagine that your pension that you've paid into for all these years could all of a sudden change? And the government seems to think that it's okay and seems to think that that is the way forward. We now have the latest situation with the SNC-Lavalin situation. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news. I mean, it is actually stunning, breathtaking, really, if you think about what's happened with the former Attorney General resigning, saying that, oh no, she wasn't pressured, that there was no inappropriate pressure, yet the Director of Prosecutor had said back in early September that they were not going to give a free pass to SNC-Lavalin with respect to bribery charges and fraud charges that they were going to prosecute. And then you have the meeting with the Prime Minister, with the Attorney General, the former Attorney General. Then you have his former head, which we all know, Gerald Butts in Trudeau's office, is the guy who calls the shot for pretty well everything, meeting with Jody. And then you have the clerk of the Privy Council meeting with Jody once again, and all of them say that there was no inappropriate pressure. And all the way through, that the decision has been made by the Director of Prosecution saying that they're going to lay these charges. And then the only person who can make these changes is the Attorney General. And all these meetings took place and no changes have been made. And the next thing you know, she's been demoted to become the Veterans Affairs Minister. And then to the point now, she felt compelled that she has to resign her position. The government kept saying that, no, nothing to see here. Everything is good. I mean, it's really quite something that in my 25 years in elected office, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it, for the government to behave the way in which they are. And I really do hope that, light will be shed on what's happened to this situation. Jody is scheduled to speak to the Justice Committee on Tuesday, and whether or not she has the opportunity to tell her truth remains to be seen. Trudeau to this day has not agreed to waive client solicitor privilege, and he kept saying, oh, well, it's complicated. Well, I don't know how complicated it is, for Jody to be able to tell the truth of what happened. Not Trudeau's version, not the Liberal government's version, but the real version of what actually happened. And if you see the sequence of events and the chronology of the events, it lays, in my view, a pretty clear case that there was tremendous pressure put on her to make a change with that decision. And you got to think about it, right? You have a big, huge corporation lobbying the government, having access to the government in an unprecedented way. And why? So that they can walk away and not face court for bribery charges and for fraud charges. I don't know about you. I don't know how many of you would have that access, but yet the biggest corporations get to have that access today. It's a little bit stunning to me. So that is the lay of the land, sadly for all of us. We thought that things were going to change, but maybe not so much. So with that, I'm going to stop here. You've listened to me patiently about what some of the things that are going on, some of the the issues that I'm dealing with as the critic, but also on the broader picture into what's going on within the government. And I think that the SNC-Lavalin issue is the biggest issue of the day right now for all Canadians. I think all Canadians deserve to know the truth. And then on the issue around temporary foreign workers, on the issue around labor rights, it's not a difficult thing to do for us to do the right thing. And yet successive governments have failed to do so. And we, the NDP, have been working hard to push the government, to hold them to account, and to drive the kind of change that I think we all want to see here in Canada. Well, one of the first things that we're doing, of course, is tomorrow is a very big day for us, for New Democrats. Our leader, Jagmeet Singh, the vote is going to take place in that by-election in Burnaby South. And so our first order of business is to get Jagmeet elected into the House of Commons so that we can have him as our leader to take it directly to Trudeau on a whole array of different issues. So if you're from the Lower Mainland, if you don't really have anything else to do tomorrow, or even if you do, maybe you can still find some time to please come and help out in this by-election. Every vote is going to count. And to make sure that people get out there and to make that change. I think that it is a significant by-election. Why? Because it sends a message. It sends a message to the government to say what you're doing is not okay, that we do not accept it, and that we want to see change. So that's the first opportunity. And then, of course, coming up, we will have nominations take place. We will have various campaigns that take place on election day in October. Please, please, please get involved with your local constituency, with your local community there. And please come out and support our candidate, to work with them, raise your issues with them. I always say this, as a member of parliament, what is my job? My job is to amplify the voices of my community, of the people in my community, and to drive for the change that we want to see. So bring your issues to your constituency folks, and please get involved with our candidates on the ground there. In terms of policy change, I mean, there are some basic things that we're also driving forward as well. One of the things that is already out there is housing. Across the country, we do have a national affordable housing crisis. In the Lower Mainland, people cannot afford to live in our city. They just cannot. And by history, we have the federal government, the federal Liberal government, back in 1993, canceled the National Affordable Housing Program. And when they did that, this country lost more than 500,000 units of affordable housing that would otherwise have been built. Imagine what our communities would look like today if we had an additional 500,000 units of affordable housing right now on the ground, right? So that was canceled by the Liberals. Now they say that, oh no, but we're fixing it. We have a national affordable housing program. Really? 90% of the money won't even flow until after the next election. And the government is counting and double counting and triple counting their numbers. And Adam Vaughan, the parliamentary secretary, actually admitted on the public record that he double counted and triple counted. Why? He says is for our competitive advantage. Oh, really? A competitive advantage? Like, we build 1 unit of housing, but I'm triple counting all of that, and to say now they're like over 1 million units. Like, really? Where are they? Nobody can see the units because they don't exist. And they're counting it in a way for the advantage, for political advantage. That's what they're doing. And so housing is a major issue that we're driving forward. And we've already announced to say that to start, what we need to see is 500,000 units to be built in this country. Real money, real units to be built in terms of affordable housing. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're also saying for Canadians, and I've met so many seniors, so many people who said to me that they cannot afford their own medicine, their medication. Tommy Douglas brought us universal Medicare. It was always his plan and dream and vision to have medication included in that. And the Liberals, by the way, through I don't know how many Red Book promises, like God, I've been in politics for 25 years. I've heard this over and over and over again, and yet they still have not delivered. Right? And so what we want to see is real universal healthcare that includes medication. And that is a critical piece that we're driving forward. And really, beyond that, dental care, right? It is so expensive to go see a dentist, to go and have your teeth taken care of. And, my mom is 83 years old. And I think when I look at the seniors, I've had seniors come to me and they cannot eat food because their teeth cannot manage the pressure of chewing. They need to actually have dentures and so on, but they can't afford it, you know? And so they are drinking liquids as though that is their everyday diet. I mean, that's just madness. I have seniors who done this thing where they cut their pill in half, as though somehow taking half the medication each day is really going to deal with their health challenges. Of course it doesn't. It doesn't help at all. But yet that's what we have, and that's our situation. So that's another piece that we're pushing forward in terms of universal pharmacare. There were many, many other aspects of platform pieces that will advance. I know that Scott Lavelle, who is a critic on labor issues, on the pension issue, we have already tabled a private member's bill with respect to that. We actually see this as part of our Canadian future, to say that when people retire, every single person should have the dignity in retirement. And so that means that they should have their pensions protected, and that people should have the kind of support.
A substantial number of the exports in British Columbia come off private land, which is under federal control. And what's the NDP's plan on dealing with some of those exports so we can make sure that the mills in British Columbia continue to get a viable source of fiber? A lot of that fiber that's exported from private lands is within 50 kilometers of the mills on the coast here that are starving for fiber. And yet it's continually put onto ships and moved across to who knows where, to give employment and opportunities for people in other countries that should be here in British Columbia or in Canada.
You know, you raised a very good question, and I sat in the provincial legislature for 19 years, and then, of course, the amount of raw log exports is breathtaking, right? I mean, really, literally, we're shipping our jobs away every single day, right? And that's happening. And I know that we've said it over and over again within the NDP to say that that's just got to stop. And so I know that my provincial colleagues are working on that file. And then, of course, we at the federal level will work in collaboration with them in support of that. We firmly believe that our natural resources that are here, that we should add value to it, that we should be creating employment here for Canadians. And those are good paying jobs. We have, you know, we're so lucky, really, here in Canada. We have access to so much resources, but we squander that. Really, we do. We squander our the gifts that we have, the resources that we have in that way. And so I couldn't agree with you more that we shouldn't be allowing these raw log exports to be taking place, and we should be doing everything that we can to ensure that we add value to our resources and to create the jobs here in Canada.
Thank you. Or, I was wondering what changes should happen, or what legislative changes should happen, so that temporary workers, foreign workers, can be better incorporated fully into unions, into organized labor, so that shops can be closed once again, they can be union shops again, and that those workers can actually have rights and a voice to exercise those rights, right? Not immediate exercise.
Mm-hmm. Well, from my perspective, I mean, one of the things for temporary foreign workers, really, you do have to ask the question, when the workers that are here doing this temporary work, and if their idea is to come and that they want to stay, right, that they're not really here temporarily per se, then you have to ask the question, what is wrong first off with our immigration policy, right? And so you have to start there with our immigration policy, and which is why a lot of the people in the migrant workers community are calling for land status on arrival. And so that is to give them their permanent resident status on arrival so that they have the full rights as a permanent resident or as Canadians. So that's sort of first off from that perspective. And then moving beyond that, in terms of organized labor, the role of organized labor, as mentioned earlier, it is so critical because there are situations that are taking place right now, and the most exploitation that exists are for the temporary foreign workers. So I think the provincial government, what they're doing is the first thing that they're doing is making sure that people know what their rights are. And perhaps that's really, I mean, I don't think we can leave that job for the employer to say, hey, here are your rights. And by the way, if I violate your rights, here's where you can go and complain about it. Like this self-reporting business, frankly, hasn't worked. And so, but maybe it's something that we should look at and say, hey, how can we work with organized labor to go in there to let the temporary foreign workers know what their rights are, that this work is being done, and so that you can actually have folks on the ground there with the workers, know their rights and access their rights, and then of course to organize people about their rights, right? So I mean, there are, I think, many different ways to which we can sort of bring that forward, and that's something that I think governments should have a conversation with labor to say, what role do you think you can play to ensure that the rights of people are protected? And especially for the people who are most vulnerable. I know that my provincial colleagues are doing some work with respect to that in terms of requirements on information for the workers. And I know that they're doing some work in terms of enforcement as well, but it's a great conversation to have with our labor allies to say, what do we need to do as a collective to ensure that people's rights are protected?
Thank you. Wanda.
You indicated that yesterday they announced that there's the 2 5-year terms for the people who...
For the caregivers.
Right. So the people who have been here for like 10 years and still have paperwork, is that all going to be taken care of as part of this, or are they still in the system waiting to bring their families? Like, does this correct any of that or no?
Yes, it does. And so for the people who are in the backlog, I have been going after the government on the backlog for 3.5 years now. And so the government has, will, and it made a commitment that those in the backlog will now be processed within 12 months. So now, I mean, it doesn't really fix it for them because, they already lost that 7 years, right? But then now they have set a standard to say that it will not be more than 12 months in terms of processing in going forward. It doesn't fix the problem for the people who's already suffered through the damage and the impact of those policies. So there is that 12-month piece. The people who are here, who are waiting, there is a group of folks, because the program will end in November of this year. So the people in that bracket, they had to have met their 2-year work requirement in order to apply for permanent resident status. And we were very worried because some of them will not meet their 2-year work requirement. Why? Because they've had an abusive worker, they have an abusive employer, they've had to leave the workplace, so then they won't have their 2-year work requirement fulfilled. So we were very worried about that cluster of people, what will happen to them. And so the part of that announcement is that the government will give them a window until May to make an application for permanent resident status, and they only have to meet 1-year work requirement. And so that should be able to address some of them. I don't know if it'll address all of them. That's something that, in fact, right after this meeting, I'm going to go talk to the caregivers and talk with them, CDWRC, about that situation there and see how many people are going to be caught out with respect to that. I think fundamentally is this. The government, this is an improvement, I will say that, is better than what it was before, giving people an open work permit and then allowing them to come to bring their families here when they come to do that temporary work. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions because the vetting for people to come before they arrive in Canada will be done before they arrive. But then after they arrive, there will be still another application process. So that means, is the government now then making people go through the process twice, right? Before they come, they have to go through the application process, and then after they come here, fulfill their 2-year work requirement, then they have to they have to go through the process again. Like, if they're doing that, then is that better? Or is just duplicating it? And then still at the end of those 2 years process, are you still going to potentially tell people, sorry, you're not qualified? right, for whatever reason, and what are the details of all of that vetting process is yet to be known. The government did not announce any of that information. So there's still going to be a lot more work to do to try and figure it out. I maintain that the best approach is still this, that if you determine that they're good enough to work here, they're good enough to stay. And that should be right on arrival.
Mike?
Yeah, I have a question about the voting system. I know that Trudeau said by this election that we're going to have proportional representation of some sort. And then, of course, for whatever reason, it didn't go the way that they thought it would go, my understanding. And so we're still going to have the first past the post, even though we said we would. What is the NDP party's stance on proportional representation and voting going forward?
Well, thank you for that question. You're right. That's another broken promise from Trudeau. He lied, frankly. He promised Canadians that in the last election that this would be the last election that will go under the first past the post system. And then after the election, there was this whole rigmarole, right? We were told, all the MPs were told to have town hall meetings, to talk with their constituents, to consult with them. We all did. I did. I had one in Van East and invited people to come and give me their opinions and so on. And people overwhelmingly, over 90% of Canadians call for a change, and people wanted to see proportional representation in place. The government rejected it. Trudeau actually said on the public record to say, well, now that I'm in government, now that I'm here, we don't need to make any change because it's better. So that's what he said. So what's the NDP position? We maintain very strongly that every single vote should count. Every single Canadian's vote should count. And that we maintain that we should have a mixed proportional representation system. And we will be campaigning on that.
So what happened in BC?
What happened in BC? We lost the referendum. And I think that part of this problem is that there was a lot of misinformation out there. On the no side, people literally provided misinformation, and this scare tactic caused people to vote in the way in which they did. I believe that because I had people come up to me to tell me, is this true? That if we had a change system, that we went to a proportional representation system, it would mean that I won't get to choose my representative, that it will be the party who gets to choose who represents you, that I will have no say whatsoever, which of course is not true, is absolutely untrue. But people believe that the no side of the campaign went overboard in telling people this misinformation. And so when people didn't know, I think it had an impact on the outcome of the vote. Now, I will also say the ballot was a little bit complex as well. If I think it was just a fairly simple, straight-up question, I think people would be able to better understand how to process that and how to answer the question. The ballot had these questions about the different systems, and then people had to rank them. I had to go look it up, right? I had to go and research the information to make sure that I got it right and understand what these systems are and what they're talking about. And it's a little bit complex. So I think that where I think we fell down is the lack of information that was provided to the public about the ballot itself, what it means in terms of the vote, and then of course countering the no side with some of that misinformation. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to follow up again if I can. We had a vote, I'm from Ontario, we had a vote in Ontario many years ago, and the no side was very newspaper article, full pages about no, and somewhat of the things that you described as well. Is it because it would be harder to lobby a government when they don't have full power with 39% of the vote? So big corporations can then just talk to one party who's in charge with 39% of the vote because they have the majority of first past the post. Is that the reason that the no side gets so much money backing toward don't vote for proportional representation? And they try to make it, and it can be complex depending on the system you take, but is that the reason, or what is the reason that the no side really is against proportional representation?
Well, in my opinion, because for them, things are working the way it is. right? A successive government. You have the conservatives, and then you have the liberals, and then the liberals, and then the conservatives. And guess what? So we have tax havens for the ultra rich, right? Who can stash their money in these tax havens and not pay their fair share of taxes. How many of you around this table or know someone have access to a tax haven? I know nobody. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Except for the Minister of Finance. I suppose I kind of know him, but not really. But he does have access to tax havens, right? That I know, right? But I know nobody in my universe who have access to tax havens. Like real people, right? I know nobody in that universe. So what's working is that it works for them. The corporate tax, right? Right? The taxes. Like, you know, it's been cut and cut and cut and cut and cut and then cut some more. Well, it's working for them, right? Big oil. I mean, they get subsidies from government. I mean, Jesus, Trans Mountain, we just spent $4.5 billion to buy a 65-year-old leaky pipeline, and the public officer in the House of Commons, who's a nonpartisan civil servant, just did a report to say that every year, just for fun, we're handing them another $900 million just for fun every year. Just as a bonus. Like, really? I mean, gosh. I mean, we've had that kind of money to throw away, right? Just imagine if we didn't do that and invested that in Canada on adding value to our resources to create jobs here. What that would be like, right? But we're not doing that. So things are working for them, thank you very much, under the current system. If we change the system, can you imagine? It would be kind of like a minority government scenario, maybe, in a way, right? Absolutely. You actually have to talk to each other. You have to talk to the other people with a different point of view to come to a place to say, this is how it's supposed to be. No, you don't get to do this thing and have access to tax havens. Because we will sit there and say, no, you don't. You don't get to do that. If you're going to give a tax break, let's talk about who are the real people who need the resources. Maybe we should be investing that money into, for example, universal health care so that every single person can buy and get the medication that they need, as an example. Because the ultra-rich will never have to worry about it. They don't need universal health care because they can just buy it anytime, any day. But for every single other person, that's not their scenario. So we will be demanding changes. And that is not in the interest of the big corporations. It's not in the best interest of the people who want to maintain the current system. In my view, the current system has worked very well for them. Thanks very much.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate what you said. Is there any other questions? Wow. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for being such a powerful activist on our behalf. Everything you said resonates. I can see the power that comes from you. And I got to tell you, we also have that same desire to change things. So you're in with friends here. So thank you very much for attending. And I appreciate everything. And good luck against those guys. Thank you. We also have a little gift for you. I hope you will take. On our behalf, thank you very much. And anytime, you're welcome to speak here. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. And keep it up. We can do this. We can do this. I believe change can happen. I believe in the power of the people. And that's what democracy is all about. And let's keep fighting.
Yes.
Right on. Thank you.